LGBTQIA+, or as many refer to it, including Susan Stryker in her titular novel Transgender History, LGBTQ. Or as the National Park Service refers to it, as of 2025, LGB is being slowly dismembered. The pieces, like tectonic plates, constantly shift and move so they can be hard to pin down. Because of this, frustration can occur, and rejection of all LGBTQIA+ communities quickly follows. I'm not here to talk about politics. I am here to speak about part of the acronym that is often left out because it wasn't even part of the commonly used acronym until the early 2020s. I'm talking, of course, about intersex. OHCHR, or the Office of the United Nations High Commissioner for Human Rights, estimates that around 1.7% of the world population is intersex. That seems like a low number, until you realize that 1.7% of the world accounts for 136 million people. That's 40% of the population of the United States. Looking at it another way, that's around the same amount of people that have natural red hair. Intersex people make up such a large number because more than 30 medical conditions exist that could cause intersex characteristics. Some of those conditions include, but are not limited to, chromosomal variations such as XXY, where a person has an extra chromosome, or X0, where a person has just one X chromosome, instead of the typical two that delineate a typical male person. There are also conditions like AIS, or androgen insensitivity syndrome, where a person's body is unable to respond to male hormones. So they are born with underdeveloped or undescended male genitalia. A great movie called Orchids speaks to the intersex condition and is linked in the description below. The person who made that film, Dr. Phoebe Hart, has AIS. CAH, or congenital adrenal hyperplasia, is another condition that an intersex person could have that can cause masculinized external genitals due to a lack of an enzyme called 21-hydrolase. When the body is severely lacking this enzyme, it produces too little cortisol, resulting in too many androgens. This condition can also cause nausea, dizziness, and even a life-threatening adrenal crisis. So it's important that it be treated and managed. However, it is important to note that proper management for this condition does not include reconstructive surgery from alternate presenting genitalia. Many people do not know that they are intersex until later in life. This is due to a variety of factors, starting with the most innocent of those, that intersex conditions do not always present physically. Many intersex conditions have to do with chromosomal abnormality, which is only detectable by blood test. Another reason that someone may not know about their intersex condition is that the mixed genitalia is internal and cannot be identified at birth. Sometimes conditions do not present until puberty or later in life. But it's the final cause that someone may not know about their intersex condition that is nefarious at best and plain wrong at worst. This is either that an intersex person's parents didn't tell them, or worse, that their parents elected to have cosmetic reconstructive surgery at birth without their consent. This has become an issue among the LGBTQIA community, because intersex people have parents that are presented with surgical options before a person is old enough to consent to cosmetic surgery. And yet, transgender people are having their rights stripped of them for surgical options. As stated before, I will save the politics for another day. Suffice to say that cosmetic surgery is generally something that should be elective unless there is a truly life-threatening condition. Those who are transgender do not necessarily choose to be transgender. It is who they are. However, they can choose to have surgery where an intersex baby cannot. Intersex as a condition is not a new concept. In fact, as early as ancient Sumer 4,000 years ago, a creation myth about Enki and Ninmah, a father and mother god respectively, discusses the creation of Nibiru. Nibru translates to eunuch, and in the myth, the sixth person that Ninmah, the mother god, creates is described as one without penis or vagina, which in today's terms has been referred to as the first mention of intersex people in history. From there, during the Greek age of antiquity, Hippocrates and Galen, as well as Aristotle, speak of the existence of sex as a spectrum, and make the first reference to hermaphrodites. It is important to note that hermaphrodite refers to someone or someones who are both fully male and fully female. The term hermaphrodite is outdated, and hermaphrodites do not exist. In fact, many people who are intersex consider that term derogatory and stigmatizing. Intersex and being intersex are the correct terms. In the 2nd century BCE, Callan of Epidaurus is the first recorded person to get surgery for a condition that Diodorus Siculus described as ambiguous genitalia. And speaking of Diodorus Siculus, he also is the first in the 1st century BCE to describe a Greek god called Hermaphroditus, or born of Hermes and Aphrodite. Siculus writes that this god has a physical body which is in combination that of a man and that of a woman. He also believes and writes about children born of those traits as prodigies of this god, and says that they will be able to foretell future events. Ovid will describe in 43 BCE the birth of this god, and then sometime between 23 and 79 CE, Pliny the Elder will be the first to use the term androgyny, which is a combination of the words ander, being the Grecian word for man, and gyne, meaning woman. From here, people with intersex traits are recorded in the history books, to the point that Bishop Augustine of Hippo writes in 400 CE that humans are created with two sexes, quote, as it happens in some births in the case of what we call androgynes. In 940 CE, a Welsh king named Hywel the Good writes laws to define, quote, the rights of hermaphrodites. In the 12th century, or the 1100s, Catholic law under Decretum Gratianae states, whether an hermaphrodite may witness a testament depends on which sex prevails. During that same century, the Catholic theologian Peter Cantor discusses how sodomy is viewed for the, quote, hermaphrodite by saying they can, quote, use the organ by which he is most aroused. But should he fail with one organ, the use of the other can never be permitted, and he must remain perpetually celibate to avoid any similarity to the role inversion of sodomy, which is detested by God. Peter Cantor is only slightly less detestable than the opinion of Otto Phrasing, who wrote in his chronicle or history of the two cities that intersex people were a, quote, mistake of nature, along with short stature, quote, Ethiopian skin, and lameness. For years after this, intersex people are seen as freaks of nature and often viewed as only acceptable if they choose one sex or the other. In the 1700s, Europe continues to legally only accept intersex people if they choose one or the other side of the sex binary. However, something different happens in colonial Virginia, where Thomas, or Thomasine Hall, a servant, is brought before a judge to determine whether they are a man or a woman. As it turns out, Thomasine was observed, without consent and while they were sleeping, to have both female genitalia and a, quote, inch-long penis that was non-functional. The court was unable to determine which sex was more prominent and ruled that Thomasine was both a male and a female, saying, he is a man and a woman. They decreed, go clothed in man's apparel, only his head to be attired in a coif and crosscloth with an apron before him. In 1792, Anglo-philologist William Jones publishes an English translation of the Mohammedan Law of Inheritance, which details inheritance rights for hermaphrodites in Islam. And then in 1794, the Prussians, which became modern-day Germany, grants hermaphrodites the right to choose their sex at the age of 18. If the sex of rearing proves to be wrong, it remains in force until 1900, when the German Civil Code becomes effective across the German Empire. On November 8, 1838, an intersex person named Herculine Barbin, and later Abel Barbin, was born. They were a very devout Catholic and were raised in a convent, solidifying those beliefs. However, after a series of affairs, they came under the scrutiny of a doctor who discovered that they had both female genitalia, without prominent breasts, and internal male genitalia. Much of the life of Herculine Barbin is only known through memoirs published by French historian Michel Foucault. However, their importance cannot be understated, as their birthday, November 8th, currently signifies the Intersex Day of Remembrance. By the end of the 19th century, medicine catches up to defining intersex people by the male or female tissue samples under a microscope. The terms are still muddled, however, and do not bear repeating. In 1915, the terms intersex for the individual and intersexuality are coined in the German language by endocrinologist Richard Goldschmidt after studies on gypsy moths. 1 year later, Goldschmidt uses the term to describe, quote, pseudohermaphroditism in humans. From here, there are several mentions of the word intersex as being used in medicine until 1932, when German OBGYN Hans Naujoks performs what is described as the first complete and comprehensive intersex surgery and hormone treatment. The patient with both ovarian and testicular tissue is operated on at the University of Marburg, and the, quote, female patient is described as fully functional after surgery. Starting in 1934, they are also reported to have spontaneously menstruated. In 1943, the first suggestion to replace the term hermaphrodite with intersex in medicine comes from British physician A.P. Cowadius. This is taken up by other physicians in the United Kingdom during the 1960s. And now remember CAH? Well, in 1944, the first intersex surgery of a child is performed at the Children's Hospital at the University of Zurich. The girl suffering from CAH has her clitoris amputated at the age of 7. She receives hormones in 1951. Between 1944 and 1947, 3 additional girls have their clitorises amputated. In July of 1950, the first mandatory sex verification tests in sports are issued by the International Association of Athletic Federations, or IAAF, for women athletes. All athletes are tested in their own countries. In 1966, a botched circumcision of a boy named David Raymer is followed by sex reassignment surgery. To add insult to injury, the case is studied by a psychologist from Harvard University named John Money, who reports incorrectly that gender identity is primarily learned. David learned between the ages of 9 and 11 that he was not a girl, and was successfully living as a male by age 15. David killed himself with a shotgun at age 38, 2 days after separating from his wife. In 1968, chromosomal sex verification is introduced to the International Olympic Committee in the Mexico City Olympics. In 1985, the Androgen Insensitivity Syndrome Support Group Australia, or AISSGA, is founded and thought to be the first intersex civil society organization. In 1986, Spanish hurdler Maria Jose Martinez Patiño is dismissed from competing after she fails a chromosomal test. In 1992, the International Amateur Athletics Federation ceases sex screening for all athletes, but retains the option of assessing the sex of participants. In 1993, the Intersex Society of North America, ISNA, is founded by Cheryl Chase and others. Chase announces the organization in a letter to the Sciences magazine. INSA remains active until 2008, when, as Susan Stryker reports in her book Transgender History, it closes its doors and declares mission accomplished. On October 26, 1996, the first demonstration by intersex people is held outside of a hotel complex in Boston, where the American Academy of Pediatrics is holding its annual conference to protest human rights violations by pediatricians toward intersex babies. This protest now, along with the Intersex Day of Remembrance on November 8th, marks the second intersex memorialized day called Intersex Awareness Day. This holiday is the first officially celebrated in 2004. Since then, the battle is hard fought for the rights and view of intersex people, and it is not until 2020 that Lurie Children's Hospital becomes the first hospital in the United States to stop performing medically unnecessary cosmetic surgeries in intersex infants and publicly apologizes to those harmed by past surgeries. This is followed by Boston Children's Hospital announcing that they too will stop performing clitoroplasties and vaginoplasties in intersex infants and will wait until the patient can meaningfully participate in conversations about risks and benefits of the procedure and give consent. I will post the link to the intersex timeline in the description below, as there is much more to read, and the battle is still raging on. The question becomes now that we know how many intersex people there are, what can cause intersex traits? How ubiquitous are intersex conditions worldwide, as well as the issues surrounding them, why the issues are still pressing, how can we get involved? Well, first I would say that education is always key, and I will post several great websites in the description for this video that you can go to learn more. A notable organization is thisisintersex.org, where you can find intersex inclusive organizations, their websites, and contact information worldwide. Intersex people are not a problem or an issue to be solved. The issue of defining them without consent is an issue, but that's a human rights issue. And like the slaughter of civilians in war, this is a problem for all of us to face, not just intersex people. Like you or me, intersex people are people. They have been handed a different set of circumstances than those of us born with exclusively male or exclusively female genitalia. But although their battles have been hard fought over the centuries, they have always been here and will continue to be here. I hope you've learned a thing or two, and I hope you do your own research from here and become an advocate for change. At the very least, I hope you acknowledge the existence of people different from yourself and love all people regardless. Even John, who stops at the yellow light when you know that you both could have made it if he hadn't stopped. I'm Dylan Paul for Dr. Keniston's Queer History class, saying celebrate difference, learn about differences, fearlessly, and remember that even if you think God has a different directive, Jesus said in John 13, verses 34 through 35, "A new commandment I give unto you, that ye love one another as I have loved you, that ye also love one another. By this shall all men know that ye are my disciples, if ye have loved one to another." He is telling you to put your life on the line for your fellow human being. This includes intersex people, as well as all members of the LGBTQIA+ community. Love is not conditional, nor is it optional. And if you think I'm wrong, then in the words of Coolio, I'll see you when you get there, if you ever get there.